Chapter 1: The Dress in the Attic. The attic smelled of dust and forgotten things. Sunlight slanted through the grimy window, illuminating boxes stacked like tombstones, each one a relic of a past my family rarely spoke of. I hadn't set foot up here in years, but with my wedding only weeks away, my mother had suggested I look through some of her old things. "You never know what you'll find," she had said with an odd smile before handing me the attic key. I was hoping for a sentimental trinket, maybe an heirloom. What I found instead made my heart stop. The dress lay inside an old cedar chest, wrapped in layers of delicate tissue paper. It was breathtaking: ivory lace, long sleeves, a row of pearl buttons trailing down the back. The moment I laid eyes on it, my chest tightened with a strange sense of familiarity. I reached out, brushing my fingers along the fabric. It felt soft, worn, but not with time. No, it felt recently worn. A whisper of unease crawled up my spine. "This was Mom's," I murmured, mostly to myself. "Yes," a voice answered from behind me. I whirled around to find my mother, Margaret, standing at the attic door. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You scared me," I said with a nervous laugh. "I didn't hear you come up." She ignored my comment, stepping forward with slow, deliberate steps. Her gaze locked onto the dress, and for a moment I could have sworn I saw something like fear in her eyes. "It's beautiful," I said, holding it up against me. "Why didn't you ever show it to me?" Margaret's fingers twitched at her sides. I didn't think it would matter. Her voice was clipped, her usual warmth absent. I frowned. "Of course it matters. I mean, I'd love to wear this for my wedding. I paused, searching for the right word. Familiar. But how could that be? No." My mother's voice was sharp, almost panicked. "Lena, you can't wear it." I blinked. "What? Why not?" She reached for the dress, but I pulled it away instinctively. "Mom, what's wrong? It's just a dress." Margaret inhaled shakily. "It's complicated." My stomach twisted. "Try me." She hesitated, then forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's just old, darling. It wouldn't suit you." I knew she was lying. Something about this dress, something about her reaction was wrong. I should have listened to the warning bells going off in my head. Instead, I took the dress home. And that was the first mistake. Chapter 2: A Photo That Shouldn't Exist. I couldn't shake the feeling. The dress sat in the corner of my bedroom, still neatly folded in its box, but its presence felt heavy, like it was watching me, or waiting. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was just a wedding dress. My mother was probably just sentimental about it, maybe even sad that I was getting married and moving on. That had to be it. Still, when Daniel and I went to his family's house for dinner that weekend, I found myself bringing it up. Big mistake. We were gathered around the long oak dining table at the Reed's estate: Daniel, his mother Marianne, his sister Claire, and me. It was the kind of elegant yet stiff dinner that made me feel like I was on display. "So," Marianne said, setting down her wine glass, "how are the wedding plans coming along?" "Good," I said, glancing at Daniel. I actually found my mom's old wedding dress. The room fell dead silent. Claire, who had been stirring her soup absent-mindedly, froze. Marianne's fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. Even Daniel went rigid beside me. I forced a laugh. "Did I say something wrong?" Daniel was the first to recover. "No, of course not," he said quickly. Too quickly. That's great." I frowned. I was thinking of wearing it, but Mom was weird about it. Like, really weird. She freaked out when I said I wanted to use it. Marianne's expression didn't change, but her knuckles had turned white against the tablecloth. "Well," she said carefully, "perhaps some things should stay in the past." Something about the way she said it sent a shiver down my spine. Claire, who had been silent this whole time, suddenly pushed her chair back. "Excuse me." She hurried from the room without another word. I turned to Daniel, my unease growing. "Okay, what the hell was that?" She doesn't like talking about weddings," he muttered. "You know, because of Evelyn." Evelyn, his first wife, the woman his family never spoke about. Before I could press him, Marianne clinked her spoon against her plate. "Enough of this. Let's enjoy dinner, shall we?" But I wasn't hungry anymore. Sure, later that night, Daniel and I returned to his townhouse. He went to take a shower, and I wandered into his office, still rattled by dinner. I had been in here dozens of times before, small, tidy, everything in its place. But tonight, something felt different. Maybe it was paranoia, maybe it was instinct, but my eyes landed on the wooden in the corner. I had never looked inside before. Daniel wasn't the type to keep secrets. At least, thought he wasn't. The cabinet was unlocked. I shouldn't have opened it. Inside were neatly arranged folders, books, and a few old photo albums. One in particular caught my eye. A leather-bound album, the edges slightly worn. I pulled it out, settling onto the couch as I flipped through the pages. It was mostly childhood photos of Daniel, his sister, their parents, innocent. And then my fingers stilled on a page. A wedding photo. Daniel stood at the altar, dressed in a crisp black suit, his arm wrapped around a woman in a stunning white gown. She was beautiful, tall, elegant, dark hair cascading over her shoulders, and she was wearing my mother's dress. I stared, my pulse pounding in my ears. No, it wasn't possible. Was it? I flipped through more pages, more photos of Daniel and Evelyn, and in every single one, she was wearing the same dress I had pulled out of the attic. A sick feeling crawled up my throat. I snapped the album shut just as I heard footsteps behind me. "What are you doing?" I turned. Daniel stood in the doorway, a towel slung around his neck, damp hair clinging to his forehead. His expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes made my stomach churn. I hesitated, holding up the album. "Daniel, why is Evelyn wearing my mother's wedding dress?" For a second, just a second, something dark flickered across his face. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. "That's impossible," he said smoothly, walking toward me. "You must be mistaken." I flipped the album open, jabbing my finger at the photo. "I'm not mistaken. Look at it." He did, and for the first time since I'd known him, Daniel Reed looked truly, utterly unnerved. I expected him to deny it, to laugh it off, to say it was just a coincidence, but he didn't. Instead, he shut the album, took it from my hands, and said in a voice so quiet it chilled me, "You shouldn't have found this." I swallowed. "Daniel, drop it, Lena." His tone was final. I should have dropped it. I didn't, and that was my second mistake. Chapter 3. The Lie That Holds a Family Together. I didn't sleep that night. Daniel lay beside me, his breathing slow and even, but I knew he wasn't really asleep. His body was too still, too tense. I kept replaying his words in my head. "You shouldn't have found this. Drop it, Lena." But I could. The dress, the photo, my mother's reaction. Too many things didn't add up. By morning, I had made a decision. I needed to talk to her. I found my mother in the kitchen, absent-mindedly stirring her coffee, lost in thought. When I walked in, she looked up with tired eyes, as if she had been expecting me. "Lena?" Her voice was careful, like she already knew what I was going to ask. I sat down across from her, placing my hands on the table. "Mom, I need you to tell me the truth." Her fingers tightened around the mug. About what? I took a steadying breath. About the dress. About why Daniel's ex-wife wore it, and about why you freaked out when I said I wanted to wear it. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then she sighed, setting the mug down with a soft clink. "Lena, there are things you don't understand. Things that are better left alone." My stomach twisted. "Why does everyone keep saying that?" She swallowed hard. "Because some lies are the only thing holding a family together." I froze. "Lies." My voice barely came out. "What are you talking about?" Mom pushed her chair back and stood up. She paced to the window, staring out as if trying to decide how much to tell me. "I never wore that dress," she finally said. My breath caught. "What?" She turned to me, her face pale. "It wasn't mine to wear." My pulse pounded in my ears. "Then whose was it?" She hesitated. Then finally, "Margaret Reed." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "Reed," I whispered, as in Daniel's family name, as in his mother. My own mother, Margaret Carter, had once been Margaret Reed. The implications hit me like a truck. My mother had been married to Daniel's father first. I stared at her, the weight of the revelation pressing down on my chest. You were married to Daniel's dad?" I whispered. Mom's jaw tightened. "A long time ago." "Why didn't you ever tell me?" My voice was rising now, panic creeping in. "Because I didn't want this for you," she said fiercely. "I wanted to keep you away from them, from him." My throat went dry. "Who?" "Daniel." She shook her head. "His father." A cold dread settled in my stomach. "What do you mean?" She closed her eyes for a long moment, as if gathering her strength. "I left because I found out something I wasn't supposed to, something about Richard Reed." I felt like I couldn't breathe. "Daniel's father." She nodded. "He had a mistress. She disappeared. And I knew that she didn't just leave." My skin prickled. "What happened to her?" I whispered. Mom's voice was almost too soft to hear. I don't know, but I was afraid I'd be next. The world felt like it was tilting. None of this made sense. And yet it did. The missing pieces were starting to come together, but there was still something I didn't understand. The dress, I said hoarsely. Why did Evelyn, Daniel's ex-wife, wear it? Mom's hands trembled as she turned back to face me. Because history repeats itself, Lena. The word sent a chill through me. What are you saying? Mom exhaled shakily. That dress, it belonged to his mistress. The room spun. The dress I had found in my attic, the dress Evelyn had worn, the dress my mother had hidden for decades. It wasn't an heirloom, it was a warning. And Evelyn had worn it because she was never supposed to leave, my mother whispered, just like the woman before her. A lump of terror lodged in my throat. Evelyn is missing. Mom's eyes were haunted. I know. I felt sick. I pushed back from the table, my chair scraping against the floor. My mother reached for me, but I stood too fast, my heart hammering. I need to go, I whispered. Lena? I didn't listen. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door because I knew exactly where I was going. Straight to Claire Reed. She knew something, and I was going to find out what, even if it killed me. Chapter 4. The Woman Who Vanished. Claire Reed's house was on the outskirts of town, tucked behind an iron gate and a long gravel driveway. I had only been here once before for an awkward family dinner, but tonight I wasn't here for pleasantries. I was here for the truth. My hands were still shaking when I knocked on the door. Seconds stretched. I heard footsteps, hesitant, deliberate. Then the door cracked open, and Claire's face appeared in the dim light. Her eyes widened when she saw me. Lena? We need to talk. She hesitated. Then, with a sigh, she unlatched the chain and stepped aside. Inside, Claire led me to the sitting room. The house was quiet, almost eerily so. I remembered she lived alone, her choice, she once told me. But tonight, it felt less like a choice and more like hiding. She perched on the edge of the couch, watching me carefully. You came here alone? She asked. I frowned. Should I not have? She exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. What do you want, Lena? I swallowed hard. I know about my mother, about Richard, about the dress. Claire flinched. Jesus. And I know that Evelyn didn't just leave. Her face went pale. A long silence stretched between us. Then, finally, Claire whispered, You need to stop digging. No. I leaned forward. Tell me the truth, please. Her hands trembled as she reached for a pack of cigarettes on the coffee table. She lit one, inhaled deeply, and then Evelyn didn't leave, she said flatly. She vanished. My pulse pounded. She and Daniel were married for less than a year. She was beautiful, smart, independent, too independent. She started asking questions. I swallowed. About what? Claire flicked ash into a tray. About our father. About his past. About why no one ever talked about his first marriage. I felt like the room was closing in on me. And then, Claire's eyes darkened. And then one night, she walked out of this house and never came back. A chill crawled up my spine. Where was she going? Claire hesitated. Then, she was going to see your mother. My breath caught. She said your mom knew something, that she was the key to all of this. Claire's lips pressed into a thin line. But she never made it. The world tilted. She never made it, I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. Claire shook her head. The last time anyone saw Evelyn was that night. She called me from her car, said she was scared, said she thought Daniel was following her. I stopped breathing. She hung up, and that was it. She was just gone. The silence in the room was suffocating. Finally, I forced myself to speak. And you never told the police? Claire let out a bitter laugh. Of course we did. But my father, he owns the police in this town. The investigation went nowhere. I felt sick. Daniel, had he followed her? Had he? No, I shook my head, refusing to believe it. Daniel loved me. He wasn't capable of... Daniel knows, doesn't he? I whispered. Claire exhaled. He knows something. But if you ask me... She looked at me, her expression haunted. I don't think Evelyn just disappeared. A lump formed in my throat. Then what happened to her? Claire's voice was barely audible. I think she's buried somewhere no one will ever find her. I left Claire's house in a daze. The night air was cold against my skin, but I barely felt it. My mind was spinning. Evelyn had been wearing my mother's dress. Evelyn had learned something she wasn't supposed to. Evelyn had vanished, and now I was about to marry into the same family. I fumbled for my car keys with numb fingers. As I unlocked the door, I heard something. A rustling like someone shifting in the shadows. I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I wasn't alone. Slowly, I turned my head, scanning the driveway, the trees beyond. Nothing. But my gut told me someone was watching. I didn't stick around to find out who. I got in the car, locked the doors, and sped away from Claire's house. I didn't look back. But maybe I should have. Because if I had, I might have seen the dark figure standing in the trees, watching me go. And maybe, just maybe, I would have seen his face.